The pen still smelled like ink when my daughter called it just a formality. Still, I signed not because I agreed, but because I had already signed something else. As her husband talked real estate comps over pork roast, I watched the steam rise from the teacups I'd set myself. The same hands that raised her were now listed as incompetent by her. That's when she opened the bank statement and saw what I'd done 90 days before. I gave her power for one night and spent the next morning revoking it from every corner of my estate. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I always told myself I'd recognize the moment. The one where it shifts, where your name stops meaning something and becomes just a placeholder on a folder someone else gets to open. It came over pork roast. Marissa slid the stack of papers across the dinner table like they were dessert. She smiled, one of those tight little expressions she's perfected, equal parts warmth and warning. Tom reached for the salt like we weren't about to change the locks on my life. "This is just a formality," she said, pen already in hand. "Dr. Patel recommended it. You've had a few slips, Mom." Slips? I'd misplaced my keys twice and left the oven on once in the last year. A far cry from dementia, but Marissa had latched onto it like a diagnosis. "Guardianship's not about control," she added, like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's protection for when things get harder." She tapped the last page gently, like coaxing a child to sign a field trip form. "You'll thank me later." I glanced down. Legal terms swam in dense paragraphs: health directives, property access, power of attorney. The kind of language that sounds reasonable when spoken and becomes something else entirely when printed in 12-point font. I took the pen. My hand hesitated. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. This old house doesn't like silence. I looked at her face, that face I raised, and thought, maybe she means well, maybe it's better to keep things peaceful, maybe it doesn't really matter. So I signed. Tom reached for the papers before the ink dried. "Perfect," he said, stacking them neatly. "You'll feel lighter, Elle, no more financial headaches." He was already talking about the house. "When the time comes," he said, like I was on hospice care instead of standing in my own kitchen. "I'll call my guy at Lockridge Realty tomorrow," he added, "just to get a feel for the comps." The air in the room went still, not hostile, just settled, like a closing argument. I washed the dishes in silence after they left. Clara's light was still on across the street. I could see her silhouette moving past her living room window, folding laundry. She'd have said something snide like, "Did they at least bring wine while they stole your future?" But Clara wasn't here. I was alone, not the kind that aches, the kind that clarifies. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table again, and pulled the papers back out. Page by page, clause by clause, I read what I had given away. Medical decisions, financial control, real estate, banking, legal representation. They didn't even need my signature to sell the house now. It wasn't guardianship, it was quiet erasure. I went upstairs, took the photograph off my dresser, Robert and I on our 35th anniversary, arms linked, his tie crooked like always. He died 3 years ago, but I still talk to him sometimes, only when it matters. "They think I'm finished," I whispered. My voice surprised me. It didn't sound broken, it sounded patient. Because I hadn't told them everything. Tomorrow, they'd learn what I'd already set in motion. But tonight, I let the words hang in the dark, soft and certain. I didn't sleep long. A few hours maybe, just enough for the house to cool and settle around me, its familiar size nudging me awake before dawn. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hush, and felt the old calm return, the one I used to rely on when grading finals at midnight, when Robert was sick, when life asked more of me than I thought I had left. I slipped on my robe and padded downstairs. The kitchen smelled like last night's tea and something else, anticipation maybe. I sat at the table again, the signed guardianship papers still stacked neatly where I'd left them, and felt an unexpected steadiness slide into place. Because this wasn't the beginning. What happened last night was simply the moment the clock ran out. 2 months earlier, I'd walked into Daniel Reeves's office with a folder tucked beneath my arm and a bitter taste in my mouth. I'd overheard Marissa and Tom whispering about long-term planning that didn't involve me, not malicious, just presumptive, like I was already drifting out of my own life. Daniel stood when I entered. "Alina, haven't seen you in a year, everything." "All right." I remember sitting, smoothing my skirt, choosing my words carefully. "I think my daughter is circling, and I think she's convinced herself she's doing it for my own good." His face softened the way it does when he knows you're not here for routine paperwork. "Tell me what you want to protect." "Everything," I said. He didn't flinch. "Then we build a barrier they can't see, not yet." He drafted documents while I watched. A secondary trust, quiet and sealed, redirecting assets piece by piece. My pension, the house, the savings Robert and I scraped together for 30 years, things Marissa assumed were already hers by inheritance timeline. When he slid the final document toward me, he tapped a line near the bottom. "Effective 90 days after signing. If they ever try something, this activates automatically." 90 days, 3 months, a deadline disguised as a fuse. I signed. And when I walked out into the Richmond sunlight that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and relief, like checking your smoke alarms right after someone assures you there's no fire. Now, in the present, I rose from the table and went to the hall closet. Behind the winter scarves, inside a worn shoebox Robert once used for storing pocket knives, the folder waited. Notarized copies, stamped, sealed, and across the top of each page in Daniel's tidy handwriting, "Effective tomorrow." The words felt like a held breath finally let go. I traced the date with my thumb. Tomorrow, everything Marissa thought she'd secured would evaporate the moment courthouse doors opened. My house, my accounts, my autonomy, they were already out of her reach. She just didn't know it yet. A knock startled me. I opened the door to Clara, hair wild, wearing a sweater that looked like it belonged to 3 ex-husbands ago. She held a plastic container in both hands. "I brought soup," she said, brushing past me like she owned the place. "You didn't look good last night." I didn't argue. She set the container on the stove and turned to face me. "Well," she demanded, "how bad was it?" I didn't show her the papers, not yet. Instead, I let her lean against the counter, tapping her nails impatiently. "Your daughter," she muttered, "is turning your life into a damn spreadsheet, checkbox by checkbox, line item by line item." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because she was exactly right. Clara narrowed her eyes. "What are you not telling me?" I hesitated, the truth pressed against my ribs, wanting out. "Not yet," I told myself. "Let the ink dry on tomorrow first." But Clara was still staring, sharp as ever. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. "Come back tomorrow morning," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "Why? What happens tomorrow?" I met her gaze, steady, certain, unshaken. "Everything," I said. And for the first time since last night, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. By mid-morning, Marissa was back. She didn't knock, just used the spare key I'd told her to keep for emergencies. Apparently this counted. I was rinsing soup bowls from Clara's visit when I heard the door creak open, followed by the rustle of paper and her voice, cheerful like someone narrating a to-do list. "Found the statement from Blue Ridge Bank," she said, sliding into the kitchen. "I'll file it with the others." She opened her purse and dropped my checkbook inside without asking. "For convenience," she added, "you always forget where you put it." I dried my hands slowly, watching her. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. I hadn't forgotten where I'd put the checkbook. I'd placed it in the exact center of my desk next to the lamp with the burnt-out bulb. I'd left it there on purpose. Marissa pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the latest utility bill and a few insurance notices. "Tom says we should consider bundling your home and auto with ours, might save a few bucks." I nodded absently and reached for my own phone, slipping it into the pocket of my cardigan. The voice memo app was already open. I tapped record without looking. "I'm just documenting things," I said later into the lens of my reading glasses. That afternoon, Tom called from the front porch. He was standing with a man in a quilted vest, too much cologne, and mirrored sunglasses. "Don't panic," Tom said, lifting both hands like I was about to chase them off with a broom. We're just exploring options, seeing what the market might say about this place. I looked past him to the realtor, who gave me a polite smile and a clipboard. On it was a flyer mock-up, charming historic home ready for transition. Transition, I said flatly, what a hopeful word. Tom chuckled, nothing official yet, just gauging. I offered them iced tea, let them walk the backyard, even unlocked the shed when the realtor asked about storage square footage. I didn't resist. Resistance invites suspicion. Silence, on the other hand, invites assumption. And they were assuming a lot. Later, I sat in the living room and transferred the audio recordings to a folder on my laptop labeled simply, Review, not confrontation, not threat, just review. At my appointment the next day, Dr. Patel was his usual brisk self. His office smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Well, Alina, he said, scanning his screen, you've lost 6 pounds since June, not unusual but something to watch. Marissa mentioned a few memory slips. She did, I said. He frowned gently. I'd call it mild cognitive awareness at this point, not decline per se, but let's stay ahead of it. Marissa, seated behind me, leaned in. Should we be concerned? Dr. Patel glanced between us. Not yet, but early documentation helps. I understand, I said, then I turned fully to face him. But for the record, forgetfulness isn't surrender, it's just the body pruning what no longer matters. He blinked, of course, well put. On the way out, Marissa squeezed my arm like I was the one who needed comforting. Back home, I made tea I didn't drink. I waited for the house to settle again. Then I sat at my desk, logged in through the secure portal Daniel had shown me, and rerouted my pension deposits. The account was quiet, unnoticed, and now untouchable. Each click felt like a stitch pulled tight in a quilt I'd been sewing for months. Steady, durable, mine. The balance updated, I closed the screen. Then, I went to the file drawer, retrieved my old ledger, the one Marissa had rolled her eyes at for years, and wrote the new transaction in blue ink. No algorithms, no spreadsheets. Just proof in my own hand. Outside, I heard the mail truck pull away. A small thud hit the porch. When I opened the door, a cream envelope lay at my feet. No return address. Inside, a court summons. Hearing date, probate division, 1 week from today. And written across the top in red marker. Petition to formalize guardianship, emergency request. I stared at it, heart steady, hands dry. Because they didn't know. Not yet. But they were about to learn. The invitation came by text. Dinner at ours, 6 p.m., just a few friends, nothing big. Followed by a smiling emoji and a champagne bottle I didn't ask for. I knew what it was before I even stepped out of the car. The porch lights at Marissa's place were glowing, warm, intentional. Tom's laugh carried down the walkway. Inside, I could already hear cutlery and glassware clinking in that overly rehearsed kind of way. It was a celebration. I just wasn't sure if I was the guest of honor or the exhibit. Mom, Marissa called out brightly as she opened the door, all smiles and perfume and hostess energy. You look great, come in. I wore navy, something quiet with sleeves. The kind of dress people stop noticing after 2 minutes, the kind you can disappear in. Inside, the dining table was already full, wine bottles, candles, and 3 couples I barely knew. People from Tom's office, I guessed, young enough to call me ma'am but old enough to sip Pinot like it was gospel. She's finally letting us help, Marissa was saying, sliding the salad bowl to the center. It's been a journey, but we're getting there. I took my seat at the end of the table, hands folded in my lap, nodding as if I were a retirement gift being passed around. Tom chimed in next, voice just a touch too loud. Honestly, once we get the house listed, that'll take a load off, and the trust's in good hands now. The word twisted in my ear, trust, they didn't even know how wrong they were. Clara arrived late, naturally. She gave no excuse, just pulled out the chair beside me, smoothed her scarf, and eyed the room like it had personally offended her. At one point, while Marissa was passing around gluten-free lemon bars like she'd baked them herself, Clara leaned in and murmured, "They're dividing your life like leftovers." I didn't flinch, just sipped my water and said, "Let them, I've set the table my way." She glanced at me sideways, lips twitching into something between admiration and dread. "Remind me never to play chess with you." Across the table, Tom's friend was going on about property taxes and market bubbles. Marissa laughed too hard at something he said. I caught her glance down the table at me, a quick check to make sure I was still quiet, still agreeable. I was. But my mind was elsewhere. Flashback 6 weeks ago. The notary's pen slid across the title deed like a plane taxiing down a runway. One signature, 2 copies. The bank teller nodding at me over her bifocals. We'll have that recorded before close of business. 4 weeks ago. Daniel and I sitting in his quiet office. Him checking every line of the asset transfer, whispering, "You're threading this needle clean, Alina." I nodded, my hands didn't shake. 3 weeks ago. Another bank, another signature, the clerk printing a receipt I never planned to show anyone. I folded it into a plain envelope, sealed it with wax. Quiet power looks like nothing at all when done right. Back at the dinner table, Mion was passing me a plate. I didn't take it. I was thinking about the daughter I raised, about the way she used to sit cross-legged on my classroom floor after school, pretending to read while listening to me lecture. I taught her to speak up, to ask questions, to lead, not follow. But I hadn't taught her to listen. She didn't see it, the irony of trying to control the woman who taught her what control was worth. The laughter swelled again and I nodded politely, but inside something cracked a little, not in anger, in grief. I missed her, the version of Marissa before she decided helping was the same as replacing. Clara touched my wrist gently. "You okay?" I gave her a look, not quite yes, not quite no, more like wait and see. Then Tom stood to toast, "To new beginnings," he said, "and to Alina for letting go." Everyone raised their glass. I smiled. Because tomorrow morning, they'd find out what I never let go of. I woke before the sky changed color. By 5:00 a.m. I was dressed and moving without sound, not out of caution but out of reverence. This morning wasn't loud, it didn't ask for noise, it asked for precision. The folder was already on the kitchen counter next to my thermos of black coffee. Not a splash of cream, no softness today, just facts, just finish lines. Daniel had sent a final confirmation the night before, time-stamped 11:14 p.m. "All documents ready, we'll file at opening. You don't need to be present unless you want to be." I did. The courthouse didn't open until 8, but I left the house by 6. There was no traffic, no sunrise, just the orange sodium glow of the streetlights flickering as I passed beneath them, Richmond still asleep around me. My hands didn't shake, they gripped the steering wheel like they had when I was 30 and driving to a parent-teacher conference that I knew would change a child's future. Same calm, same purpose. I parked 3 blocks from the courthouse just to walk. The wind cut through my coat, sharp and clean. It didn't matter, I welcomed the cold. It made things feel clearer, like the whole city was inhaling with me. By 6:40 a.m. I stood on the top level of the parking deck across from the courthouse's west entrance, the one that faced the records office. I leaned on the concrete railing and waited, the folder tucked under my arm. From here I could see everything. The courthouse doors opened at 7:55 a.m. A single custodian walked through, then a clerk, then a man in a gray wool coat, Daniel. He didn't look up, he didn't need to. He moved with the same steady gait I remembered from every estate case he'd handled in his wood-paneled office, where the walls smelled of old leather and tea. But today, he was a scalpel in a city that didn't yet know it had been cut. 7:59, he paused beneath the archway. 8:00, he stepped inside. I placed my hand over my chest, not dramatic, not a gesture of sentiment, just to feel the quiet, rhythmic truth of my own pulse, still mine. At 8:01 my phone rang. Daniel's voice came through calm as a benediction. "It's done, you're free." Those words, 4 syllables, landed with more weight than anything Marissa had ever shouted at me. I closed my eyes just for a breath. Then I opened the folder, removed the clean copy of the deed transfer and traced the updated line with one finger. Ownership Whitman Living Trust sole beneficiary, Eleanor Whitman. No joint title, no contingency clauses, no room for interpretation. The house, the pension, the life insurance, the accounts. All officially insulated, irrevocable, and out of their hands. And her power of attorney, that glorified leash, voided the moment Daniel's filing hit the clerk's desk. She wouldn't find out yet, not until she called the bank and got a polite refusal, not until the insurance agent redirected her call, not until she walked into the courthouse for the emergency guardianship hearing and realized she had no standing, no access, no claim. I stood there a few moments longer watching Richmond begin to stir. Coffee carts opened. Lawyers paced sidewalks with damp folders tucked under their arms. Life resumed, but something inside me did not return to what it was. It wasn't just relief, it was reclamation. I didn't win anything today, I took back what had never been theirs to claim. As I walked back to my car, I passed a mother and daughter coming out of the nearby bakery. The girl had red mittens and a chocolate stain on her chin. She tugged on her mother's coat, asking for something else. The woman didn't look down, just said, "You've had enough." The girl didn't cry, she simply stopped asking. I got in the car, sat with the engine off, and stared at my phone. No text, no calls, the silence itself was an answer. But I knew that wouldn't last. By tonight, someone would discover the shift. And then the real undoing would begin. They showed up just before noon. I saw the silver SUV pull into the driveway too fast, front tires grazing the edge of my flower bed. The engine cut, doors slammed, and then Marissa's heels hit the front steps like a gavel, sharp, final, loud. She didn't knock. The door swung open and hit the wall with the kind of force meant to announce war. "What the hell did you do?" She stood in the foyer, flushed and shaking, her phone still in her hand like it had delivered a personal betrayal. Behind her, Tom hovered near the doorway, face unreadable but fists tight in his jacket pockets. I didn't move from the table. I poured hot water into a porcelain teapot Robert and I received for our wedding, set out 2 cups, and gestured calmly. "Tea. Don't play games with me, Mom." Her voice broke in places she didn't want it to. "The bank froze the joint account. They said they couldn't talk to me, that I wasn't authorized anymore." I lifted the lid, let the steam rise. "You'll have to ask the trustee." Her breath hitched. "Who's the trustee?" I looked up and met her eyes with the full weight of everything she'd tried to strip away. "Not you." There was a moment, a flicker, where I saw the girl I used to braid ribbons into. Then it was gone, replaced by someone older, sharper, rattling the bars of a cage she never thought she'd be inside. "You can't do this, I'm your daughter." "You did this," I said softly, "I'm just responding." Tom stepped forward, his voice had lost the realtor's charm. "Look, Eleanor, you're confused. That's not me being rude, that's just the reality. This whole trust thing is a mistake, we can undo it." Quietly, no lawyers. Before I could respond, Clara's voice shot across the hallway like a steel beam. She said no. They turned. Clara stood at the foot of the staircase, arms crossed, hair still in curlers, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "If you can read this, bring coffee." She looked like she'd just wandered in from a sitcom, but there was nothing funny in her face. Tom scoffed, "This is a family matter." "No," Clara said, stepping forward, "this is a legal matter. And unless either of you brought a warrant, I suggest you walk yourselves back out that door before I call Richmond PD and say my elderly neighbor is being harassed by 2 people who have no legal claim to be in her home." Marissa's lip curled. "She doesn't know what she's doing." I tilted my head. "That's funny, you said the same thing about me." Silence pressed against the walls. I stood slowly, walked to the side table near the window, and retrieved my phone. I opened the recording app, tapped a file, and held it up for them to see the waveform moving as it played. "You've both said quite a bit over the past few weeks. Just wanted to make sure I had everything documented." Tom swore under his breath. Marissa stared at me like I was someone she'd never met. "You'll regret this," she said finally, her voice low and shaking. "You don't know what you've started." I walked back to the table, set the phone down, and reached for the teacups. "I've already accounted for it," I said, filling each one halfway, right down to the interest. She didn't stay, neither of them did. The front door slammed with the full weight of things they couldn't unsay. Clara let out a slow whistle. Damn Whitman. I sat down and sipped my tea. It had steeped a bit too long, slightly bitter, still warm. Later, I emailed the recordings to Daniel with the subject line: "Additional evidence, FYI." His reply came minutes later. "Received, logged, solid ground." I closed my laptop and looked at the quiet house, the kind of quiet that follows a storm or the kind that warns of another one coming. Because next came the courthouse. And this time, I wouldn't be walking in alone. The summons came on a Tuesday. Hand-delivered, thick envelope, county seal, formality dressed like civility. I accepted it with a nod and closed the door behind me before the delivery clerk could ask if I needed help reading it. I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table, slid my finger beneath the flap, and unfolded each page like it was part of a test I'd already studied for. Petition for emergency guardianship, request for full financial oversight, hearing scheduled Thursday 9:30 a.m. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pushed the papers aside, opened the second drawer of the sideboard, and removed a gray accordion file labeled "just in case." It held a decade's worth of bank statements, notarized property tax receipts, healthcare directives signed in 3 states, and a running ledger that I'd updated every single month since Robert passed. I'd made it neat, knowing one day someone would try to make me look messy. The phone rang just after lunch. "Daniel, received the summons?" he asked. I did. There was a pause, not hesitation, just him switching gears. I could picture him already seated at his desk, tie slightly askew, one legal pad in front of him and a second to the side, labeled strategy. "They're trying to fast-track it," he said, "but we'll win on documentation. The filings from last week are ironclad." "IKN." "Oh," I said. "We'll walk in with every signature timestamped and every transaction traceable. The judge won't have room to doubt you." "I don't need him to like me," I replied, "just to read carefully." Daniel chuckled. "Then we're in good shape." I arrived early. Richmond's probate court was colder than I remembered, all polished tile and fluorescent lighting. A clerk handed me a visitor badge and told me to sit in the gallery until my name was called. Marissa was already there. She stood by the double doors in a burgundy wrap dress that looked both expensive and strategic. Her expression was smooth, almost performative. She greeted the bailiff like they were old friends. Tom hovered beside her, flipping through a thin stack of papers that looked less prepared than they wanted it to. Neither of them looked at me. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching the door until Daniel appeared. He walked in without ceremony, a leather briefcase in one hand and a copy of the trust transfer in the other. "She's smiling," I murmured. Daniel didn't look. "She won't be for long." When our case was called, we rose. The courtroom was small, intimate, the kind of space that makes it harder to lie. The judge was a middle-aged woman with silver hair pulled into a tight twist and reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. She looked like the kind of person who spent her weekends reading depositions for fun. She began with the usual, names, dates, the petition summary. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Whitman, do you understand the nature of this hearing?" "Completely," I said, voice steady. "Do they?" A ripple moved through the room, quiet but tangible. Marissa shifted, trying to reassert control. "I only filed because I was concerned. She's been forgetting things. She left the stove on. She couldn't find her checkbook." "Objection," Daniel said calmly. "Assumptions presented without evidence. We have medical documentation stating no diagnosis of cognitive decline." The judge held up a hand. "Noted, let's stay on facts." Daniel handed her a folder. "Your Honor, within this file are 10 years of documented financial records, a full estate plan, notarized directives, and proof of a recent trust transfer, all executed while Mrs. Whitman had full legal capacity, and all prior to any guardianship filing." The judge flipped through the folder slowly, her brow furrowed. Then she looked at Marissa. "Mrs. Gray, did you know your mother had legally transferred her estate prior to this hearing?" Marissa blinked. She never said anything." That doesn't make it invalid, the judge said almost to herself. I watched her closely. Not for kindness. For fairness. She closed the folder, tapping it once on the bench like a gavel in miniature. I'd like to hear from Mrs. Whitman again, in her own words. I stood. The whole room shifted its weight toward me. This was no longer just about paperwork. Now it was about truth. I approached the bench with both hands on the binder. Not because it was heavy, because it was deliberate. I wanted every page, every tabbed divider, every inked date to speak louder than Marissa's rehearsed concern ever could. The judge gestured me forward. I placed the binder on the evidence table between us. I maintain my own financial records, I said, looking directly at her. Always have. She opened it slowly. First page, an index color-coded by year. The second, a summary of assets before the trust, pension inflows, savings, property taxes, insurance premiums. Then came the anomalies, small at first. A $94 charge at a boutique I'd never visited. A recurring auto payment for a storage unit listed under Marissa's address. A $5,000 wire transfer to a joint account with Tom's name on it, dated 3 weeks before the guardianship petition. Each page had its own tab. Each tab had a notarized affidavit from Daniel's office. The judge flipped faster now. Marissa stood. This is misleading. She's been confused. She doesn't understand how digital banking works, half of this stuff. Sit down, the judge said, not unkindly but with steel. Daniel rose next, voice low, steady. We also submitted login history showing who accessed her accounts. Most of these transactions occurred from Marissa and Tom's IP address, and not a single one has Aliner's initials on file. Marissa's face flushed. She asked us to help. She left bills unpaid. She gave me the checkbook. I tilted my head slightly. No, you took it, and you filmed yourself saying so. It's in the court's evidence file, entry 6. The courtroom was silent except for the soft rustling of legal pads. The judge closed the binder and tapped the cover once, the way she had with my trust documents. She looked at Marissa for a long, measured beat. Do you understand that if we find these transactions were made without consent, it could constitute financial exploitation under state code? Marissa tried to speak, failed, her voice came out dry. I was helping her. Tom shifted beside her, jaw tight, arms folded. He didn't say a word. But his eyes cut sideways to the binder, then to her. He just realized they were not on the same side anymore. The judge leaned back in her chair. Given the weight of these documents and pending verification of the digital audit, I'm postponing ruling until formal review. I will also be requesting Adult Protective Services to initiate a wellness evaluation of both parties. She turned to Daniel. I assume your client remains in her home. She does, he said, safely, independently, legally. Then she stays there, the judge ruled, until I say otherwise. She stood. Court is adjourned until further notice. The gavel didn't slam. It whispered. Outside, the cold hit harder than I expected, or maybe I just felt lighter than I'd been in months. Daniel gave my shoulder a squeeze before heading toward the parking garage. That was a clean pivot, he said. You didn't blink. I didn't respond, not because I didn't agree, but because I wasn't done blinking yet. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, just breathing, letting it settle. The sidewalk buzzed with motion, attorneys with coffee cups, a man arguing with a parking meter, the whir of traffic trying to pretend this building didn't change people. Then Clara appeared, wrapped in a scarf that looked older than her last marriage. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. I raised an eyebrow. You came all the way downtown. I sat in the back, she said, didn't want to get in the way of your moment. I laughed once, short, grateful. Then she hugged me, real arms, real warmth. You just turned the tables, Whitman. I exhaled into her shoulder. They were never her tables to set. We stood there a moment longer, the courthouse behind us, the city ahead. Clara pulled back and grinned. So what comes next? I looked out across the street where Marissa and Tom stood beside their car. She was yelling, he wasn't yelling back. I let myself watch for just a moment. Then I said, now we let the numbers speak for themselves. It was the kind of morning Richmond tried to dress up a pale sun through courthouse windows, clean-swept steps, the scent of fresh mulch in the planters outside like someone thought that could soften what happened inside. I wore gray, nothing stern, nothing soft, just steady. Daniel met me outside courtroom 2B, a legal pad in one hand and a thermos in the other. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready," I said, "they just didn't know." Inside, Marissa sat at the petitioner's table in a navy suit too crisp to be comfortable. Her new attorney, a younger man with expressive eyebrows and a performative way of flipping through documents, leaned in and whispered something to her that made her nod too fast. Tom sat behind her this time, one row back, no notes, no eye contact. The judge took her seat, glasses already on, face unreadable. "We reconvene today on the matter of guardianship over Alina Whitman," she began, following a postponement for financial audit and evidentiary review. She gestured toward Marissa's side. "Counselor, you may proceed." The young lawyer rose, smoothing his tie like it mattered. "Your Honor," he began, "we'd like to reframe this not as a legal confrontation but as a plea of compassion. My client has watched her mother decline not dramatically but subtly. She acted not out of greed but fear, out of love." He turned toward me, as if appealing to the jury that didn't exist. "She only wanted to protect her. Families, they make messy choices sometimes, but that doesn't make them malicious." Daniel didn't stand right away. He let the room breathe. Then he rose, opened a folder, and walked forward. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to introduce supplemental findings from the audit your office requested. These include not just unauthorized access to accounts but newly discovered transactions routed from Alina Whitman's retirement fund into an account registered under the name Marissa Gray." The room didn't gasp, not at first. It sighed. That slow, collective intake of breath that happens when something undeniable finally reaches the surface. The judge lifted her head. "Continue." Daniel handed over the spreadsheet, page after page of clean entries, dates, amounts, routing numbers, a pattern. "Each withdrawal occurred after the initial power of attorney was signed," Daniel said, "but before Alina's trust was activated. The window was small, but they moved fast." I kept my eyes on the bench, not on Marissa. But I saw her in the reflection of the clerk's glasses, frozen, pale, her lawyer whispering again, "Too late now." The judge took her time reading, then she looked up directly at Marissa. "Mrs. Gray," she said, "I'll be honest, I walked into this hearing expecting a muddled case of conflicting intentions, but what I see here is not confusion. I see strategy, hidden accounts, withheld information." She turned to me. "Mrs. Whitman, are you still in possession of your home?" "I am. Still managing your finances independently." "Yes, ma'am." "And has your capacity been challenged by any medical professional since this case began?" "No, only my daughter." A long pause followed. Then the gavel came down. "Petition denied, guardianship revoked. All rights and decisions revert immediately and exclusively to Alina Whitman." Marissa didn't stand. Her hands were clasped in her lap, clenched so tight her knuckles went white. Outside, the press waited, not many, just two local reporters and a woman with a podcast mic, clearly briefed and eager. One of them called out as we stepped down the courthouse steps. "Mrs. Whitman, how do you feel about the ruling today?" I paused, then looked straight into the lens. "Balanced." One word, the only one I needed. Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Let them unpack that." Behind me, Marissa pushed through the courthouse doors and stormed past the cameras, head down, heels stabbing the concrete. Tom trailed behind, hands in pockets, not speaking, not even pretending anymore. Clara met me at the car, keys in hand. "Now what?" she asked. I looked back at the courthouse, the place they tried to erase me from. And then forward. Now we fix the damage they left behind. I thought the courthouse would be the last battleground. It was. 3 days after the ruling, Daniel called me just after breakfast, his voice as even as ever, but this time with something under it. A tension I hadn't heard since Robert's estate was settled years ago. "They're claiming partial ownership of the house," he said. I blinked, stirring cream into my coffee. Based on what? A claim filed last night, unsigned, but filed. They're arguing you verbally agreed to list the property jointly when the guardianship was initiated, that it was part of family planning. I didn't laugh, it was too predictable to be funny. He continued, they're hoping you won't contest it, that you'll be tired, that you'll want to stay out of court. It's not a legal move, it's a psychological one. They still think I'm playing defense, I said. Do you have the revised deed handy? I rose from the table and walked to the study. The filing cabinet slid open like it had been waiting, tabbed folders, alphabetical, no gaps. I pulled out the one labeled Property Whitman Eleanor. Inside, the trust documents, deed reassignment, asset shield agreement, all notarized, all dated before their guardianship stunt ever hit paper. Found it, I said, ironclad. Then we're filing a counterclaim, Daniel said. Harassment, misrepresentation, and damages. A beat passed, do you want to add defamation? I thought about it, about the way Marissa had painted me, unstable, declining, fragile in phone calls I'd never heard in living rooms I'd never entered. I don't need them silenced, I said, just corrected. Done, he replied, we'll serve them by Tuesday. By Wednesday, the local paper had run the headline. Retired teacher fights back in elder financial abuse case, court sides with her. My name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't need to be. The photo was enough. Me in gray, stepping out of the courthouse, eyes forward. By Friday, the same photo appeared online beside a new headline. Real estate agent linked to exploitation claim. Tom's brokerage released a statement, generic, sanitized. We take these allegations seriously and are reviewing the matter internally. He disappeared from their website the next morning. Clara taped the article to my fridge. You're the plot twist of the neighborhood. I gave her a look. She just smiled. You say revenge isn't your style, but it suits you. It's not revenge, I said, it's repair. Still, I let her leave it there. The phone started ringing by the weekend. Reporters, advocacy groups, distant cousins I hadn't heard from since Reagan was in office. I didn't answer any of them. Clara did. She sat in my kitchen like she was manning a call center, jotting names on a notepad and rating each message on a scale of harmless to absolutely not. One man from a podcast offered to fly in and do a survivor spotlight. She laughed for a solid minute. Sir, she's not a survivor, she's a strategist. I stayed quiet, watching the sunlight move across the living room floor like time marking its approval. Outside, the wind picked up, fall pressing into winter. Inside, it was still. Safe. Mine. That night, I opened my journal for the first time since the trial ended. I flipped past the old entries, the ones written in softer ink, back when I was still hoping Marissa's motives came from love and not control. I turned to a fresh page. Wrote only one sentence. The account is clear, the house is quiet, the door is locked. Then I paused. Because I knew what came next. This wasn't over. Not entirely. Because the next envelope, the one that would arrive in a few days, folded neatly in expensive stationery, wouldn't be legal. It would be personal. And I would have to decide what to do with it. It was raining when she knocked. Not pouring, just thigh. Steady kind of rain that feels like confession. Gray light, wet pavement, the kind of morning where everything slows down. I almost didn't get up from the armchair. But I knew it was her. When I opened the door, Marissa stood there with an envelope in one hand and nothing rehearsed in her face. Her mascara was smudged, not a dramatic streak, just enough to let me know she hadn't planned to cry, but did anyway. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, or maybe just closer to the age she was before she started talking to me like a patient. I stepped aside. She came in slow, like the air might collapse if she moved too fast. I didn't offer to take her coat. She didn't ask. We just stood in the foyer for a moment, the air thick with something we hadn't had between us in years, no performance. She finally held out the envelope. I was going to mail it, but it felt wrong to put it in a box after everything. I set it on the side table without opening it. She didn't push. I just wanted to protect you, she said. It came out brittle, too used, too late. No, I said gently, you wanted control, it's not the same. She looked down at her shoes, rainwater pooling on the mat. She didn't argue. I was scared, she whispered. After Dad died, I kept thinking about what would happen to you, to me. I didn't want to end up waiting like you did. That last part stung more than she knew, maybe more than she meant. I turned toward the kitchen. Sit down, I'll make tea. She followed. We didn't speak for a few minutes. I filled the kettle, set 2 cups on the counter, the same porcelain ones we used when she was 12 and had chickenpox, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her like armor. When the tea was ready, I placed her cup in front of her and sat down opposite. It was the first honest silence we'd had in years. No transaction, no strategy. Just 2 women with too many memories and not enough grace left between them. I read the articles, she said after a while. The comments, someone said I should be in jail. I didn't respond. I'm not proud of any of it, she added. I let the words sit in the air, let them do their own work. Then I said, this house is still mine. That's not just about the deed, it's about the atmosphere. She nodded, ashamed. I know. So if you want to step back into it, even for a visit, there's a condition. She looked up, guarded but not defiant. Therapy, I said, real therapy, not once, not just for optics. I need to know you're taking responsibility somewhere beyond this table, or you don't come back. Her lips parted like she might push back, then closed. She stared at the tea, then picked up the cup and held it without drinking. A full 30 seconds passed. Then she nodded once, a quiet, uncertain surrender. I watched her, unsure whether she was about to cry or curse or walk out and never return. But she didn't move. And I didn't ask her to. Clara's car pulled into the driveway just then, headlights slashing across the rain-streaked window. She honked once, just her way of announcing herself, never one for subtlety. Marissa flinched slightly. I stood, I'll let her in. Marissa stayed seated, her hands still wrapped around the cup like it was something fragile she wasn't ready to break. When I reached the door, I heard her voice, quiet, almost to herself. Did you ever think it would end like this? I didn't turn around. No, I said, but I'm not sure it's ending. The studio lights weren't as harsh as I'd expected. Soft, actually, almost flattering, though I hadn't come to be flattered. Across from me sat a woman named Dina, host of a syndicated radio show about elder care and ethics. A clear voice, clear questions, clear conscience, the kind of person who'd never once used the phrase cute little old lady in her life. We're here today with Alina Whitman, she said, smiling through her intro, whose recent legal battle has opened up national conversation about elder financial abuse. Mrs. Whitman, thank you for being with us. I gave a small nod. Thank you for making space for the story, not just the headline. She smiled wider. Let's start there. What was the moment it stopped being just your story? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I'm not sure it ever was just mine. I think it was the day someone said I was confused for wanting privacy, I said, as if privacy was a symptom. Dina leaned in, and that confusion turned into court filings. I nodded. Control disguised as concern happens more often than people think. From there, the conversation found its rhythm, not sensational, not bitter, just honest. I spoke about the guardianship petition, the financial records, the way silence can be mistaken for consent if you're not careful. You never raised your voice, Dina noted. Didn't need to, I said. I had receipts. That made her laugh, but when we broke for the ad segment, she turned to me off mic and said quietly, I wish my aunt had done what you did. I didn't ask what she meant. Some silences aren't wounds, they're monuments. The episode aired 2 days later. I didn't expect much, a few local listeners, maybe a handful of messages. But by the end of the week, Clara had cleared off the dining table to make room for the letters. Real ones, paper and pen, some with shaky cursive, some typed in 14-point font. From Montana, from Ohio, from a woman in Florida who'd fought the same battle and lost, until now. I was ready to give up, she wrote. Then I heard you, and I made an appointment with a lawyer. Another read. My daughter hasn't spoken to me since I took my name off the joint account. Thank you for reminding me I'm not selfish, just smart. Some came with cookies, one with a quilted bookmark, another with a laminated flyer warning seniors about guardianship abuse stapled to a photocopy of my interview transcript. Clara, holding a letter from someone named Dennis in Wichita, whistled low. You started a movement without hashtags. I raised an eyebrow. Do I need hashtags? No, she said, flipping the envelope over. You've got stationary and righteous fury, more sustainable. Daniel stopped by the next week, a manila folder under one arm and a crooked smile that meant he was up to something. You've got a platform now, he said. People are listening, maybe it's time to write the rest of it down. I gestured at the stack of letters. Isn't that what they're doing? I mean your story, he said, start to finish, not just what they did but what you did after. He pulled a small journal from his coat, leather-bound, burgundy, unused. I know you've got your ledgers, he said, this one's for you. Later that night, when the house had gone still again and Clara had taken her sarcasm home, I sat at the desk by the window and opened the cover. The paper was thick, crisp. I picked up my pen. Wrote the first line without hesitation. The moment they took my signature, I rewrote the contract. I stared at the words for a long time. Not because I was uncertain, but because I knew exactly where they were going next. And who would finally read them. It came on a Tuesday, again. Different envelope, handwritten this time, no stamp, just my name in Marissa's handwriting, the looping kind she used when she was learning cursive in 3rd grade and wanted everything to look like a wedding invitation. Clara found it in the mailbox and didn't say a word, just set it on the kitchen counter next to my tea, then quietly left the room like she knew the contents might shift the air. I didn't open it right away. I finished steeping the chamomile, let the kettle click off, let the silence stretch. Then I reached for the envelope and slid my finger beneath the flap. No theatrics, just 5 lines. I understand now. I was wrong. There's no excuse. Can we start over? I've enclosed something I never gave you. The folded paper inside wasn't a letter, it was a deed transfer. For her house. Her name in the cellar box, mine as co-owner. Filed notarized, dated 2 days ago. My fingers didn't shake, but something underneath them did, a tremor, not in the hand, but in the gut. The girl who had once taken my signature and tried to weaponize it had just signed over her own name. No conditions, no note explaining why, just a legal gesture dressed like an apology. I stared at it for a long time. This wasn't a settlement, it was a surrender. And it was exactly what I'd never asked for but always needed, something real, something offered, not demanded. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the slow, strange warmth of something returning to balance. Still, I knew what I had to do. By noon, I had my own documents printed. The deed transfer back to Marissa, signed, witnessed, and dated. I folded them with care and wrote a note in the cleanest script I had left. Now you decide. Not to owe, not to prove. Just decide who you want to be when no one's keeping score. Clara came in as I was sealing the envelope. She watched me slide it into the outgoing mail tray and raised one eyebrow like she was bracing for an explanation. I handed her the original. She read it once, then again, her mouth opened slightly, but she didn't speak right away. Then she said softly, "That's not a letter." I tilted my head, "No." She looked up, eyes glassed with something not quite tears but near enough. "It's a mirror." I didn't respond, I didn't need to. Because we both understood what had happened. Power is a funny thing. People think it lives in who signs first, or who wins the room, or who's holding the microphone. But real power, the kind that stays, comes from the moment you could hold something over someone and you choose not to. That was the pivot. That was the page I hadn't yet written until now. Clara blinked fast, waved her hand at her face like she could fan the emotion away. "You balanced more than books, Whitman." I smiled faintly. I was never trying to balance the books. No. I was trying to balance the relationship. A pause, then she gave a small, proud scoff. "Well, you may have just done both." The sun hit the edge of the counter then, the first time in weeks it had angled through that window at just the right moment. A kind of light that doesn't announce itself, it just lands. And stays. I watched it for a beat longer before turning to clean up the empty teacup, the envelope already waiting for tomorrow's mail. Because that was all that was left now. Not ownership. Not control. Just decision. And this time, I wouldn't be the one making it. The lake house didn't have a front porch swing, but it had silence. The kind that doesn't beg for meaning, it just allows it. No traffic, no hallway arguments, just wind and water. I bought it quietly, no listings, no agents, just a handshake and a file of documents signed in a notary's side office that smelled like vanilla hand sanitizer and ballpoint ink. Clara cried when I told her. "You're really doing it," she said. "New zip code, new view, same sass." "It's not an escape," I told her. "It's a recalibration." She smirked. "That's the nerdiest word for peace I've ever heard." But it was true. I didn't flee Richmond, I just outgrew the version of myself they tried to archive there. The settlement hadn't been large, just enough to make a point, to cover court costs, headaches, and the bruising of reputation, but I didn't need all of it. So I gave part away. The check to the Senior Legal Protection Fund was delivered on a Thursday, handwritten note tucked inside. For the ones who still think they can't say no. May this buy them one more reason to. Daniel called me a week later and read me their thank you email over the phone. I didn't need it read aloud, but I let him. People like Daniel need to narrate closure so they can believe in it. Clara visits once a week, sometimes more. She brings ridiculous aprons and stories about her neighbor's scandalous dog walker, or articles clipped from the paper that she says smell of our demographic. We bake cookies we don't need, we gossip like retired spies, we laugh so hard sometimes I have to sit down just to keep breathing. "You're softer out here," she told me once, licking batter from her knuckle. Or maybe I'm just finally not bracing for impact. "You always were composed." There's a difference between composure and flinching without showing it. She blinked. "Well, you don't flinch anymore." I teach now too, not formally. Just an ethics seminar for junior accountants who think Excel sheets are more important than the people behind them. I tell them about fiduciary integrity, about respect, about the math of moral debt. Sometimes I see one of them scribbling down something that wasn't even in the syllabus. That's when I know they're listening. I don't mention my own case unless someone asks. And when they do, I don't tell them the headline. I tell them about the moment I signed something in silence and then learned how to sign something else in defiance. I tell them about power and how it doesn't come from authority. It comes from knowing exactly what is yours and refusing to let anyone call it theirs. The holidays came slow and quiet this year, no fights about pies or headcounts, no emails pretending not to be barbed. Just one envelope. A card, snowflakes on the cover, Marissa's handwriting inside. "Merry Christmas, Mom. You were always right about the quiet. The kids send love. Maybe next year. M." I read it once, didn't cry, didn't analyze. Didn't even fold it again. I just placed it in the drawer beside the stove, next to the cinnamon and my old address labels. It didn't hurt this time. Because I finally knew the difference between missing someone and needing them to be who they're not. That night, I lit a candle, made tea, and opened my journal, the leather one Daniel gave me before all the headlines. I didn't write much. Just a line. Freedom compounds. Like interest, like grace, like the kind of peace you don't barter for, you earn. Then I closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the dark come in like a friend finally home. Because that's the thing about balance. Once you stop chasing it, you realize it was waiting for you to be still enough. To notice you'd had it all along. The dawn came in gold. Not soft, not shy, bold, like it had been waiting for permission to spill across my kitchen floor. It lit up the suitcase by the door, catching the brass latch and turning it warm. I'd packed it the night before, 2 sweaters, a sensible pair of shoes, 1 dress I had no intention of justifying, and a guidebook dog-eared to pages I planned to read on the plane. Italy. My first solo trip in 20 years. Not a retreat, not a bucket list item, just a choice mine. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water over a tea bag and watched the steam rise in delicate spirals, little ghosts climbing into morning air. For a moment I stood there with my hands around the mug and let the quiet fill the room, not the fragile quiet of waiting for something to go wrong, the earned quiet, the permanent kind. Then my phone rang. I knew the tone without looking, the custom one I'd chosen for Marissa long before things got complicated. 3 soft chimes, almost musical. I let it play once before answering. "Morning," she said, and even through the cell signal I could hear it. Her voice had changed again, softer, rounded, like she'd stopped bracing against herself. "You heading out?" she asked. "In a couple of hours," I said. "The airport shuttle should be here soon." A pause, not tense, just thoughtful. "I'm glad you're going," she said. "Really, I think it's good." Good, the simplest word, the truest one. "I learned something from all of this," I said, wrapping my fingers around the mug. Oh, she sounded wary but not defensive. "Yes," I said, "you taught me one thing: never sign power away." For a heartbeat, I thought she might go silent the way she used to when she felt accused, but then she laughed, startled, a little shaky, but real. "Well," she said, "I didn't mean to teach you that." "I know," I replied, "but you did, and I'm grateful." Another soft laugh. "You're impossible." "Genetic," I said. We hovered in that fragile peace, neither of us sure whether to end the call or keep holding it open. But she made the decision, small, tentative, but hers. "Send me pictures," she asked. "If you want them," I said. "I do." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't a rewrite of the past. It was a truce, the kind built not on what we had been, but on who we could still become. We said goodbye, not the clipped kind, not the heavy kind, just goodbye. I finished my tea, washed the cup, dried it, and placed it back on the shelf, a habit I'd never lost, even when everything else felt scattered. When the shuttle honked from the driveway, I took one last look around the house. My house, my life, orderly, quiet, mine in every ledger and every sense. I lifted the suitcase and stepped into the morning. At the airport, I found my gate early. I like being early. It gives me space to breathe, to think, to choose the rhythm instead of being dragged by it. I sat by the window overlooking the runway, pulled out my journal, and opened to the last filled page, the one where I'd written freedom compounds. The ink had dried smooth, unhurried. I uncapped my pen. For a long moment, I let the tip hover above the paper, waiting for the words to settle inside me the way decisions used to settle outside of me. Then I wrote. Every account settled, every choice mine. I closed the journal, set it gently in my bag, and watched as a plane glided across the tarmac toward the horizon I was finally ready to meet. They called my boarding group. I stood. And as I stepped forward, I felt the full truth of it, a truth that had taken a courtroom, a trust, a letter, a lake house, and nearly losing my daughter to understand. My daughter said, "I don't decide anything anymore." She was wrong the next morning and every morning after.